All right. No problem. They needed a break anyway. So let's go back to the story. The story is that Lloyd and I were at the time grad students, and he was really good with computers. I was pretty good with math, and our advisor was good with everything. And the reason I brought that up is that because about the same time, I started reading a book on learning and communication and perception. And I found this article in it that it really got me going and changed a lot for me. Okay, I don't want to do that. Okay. It's telling me to turn up the volume on mine. Should I do it or not? Okay, tell him shut up then. All right. I saw on that article was something like this. The article was not about this, but the author asked a question. What is more important, a question or the answer to the question? And that intrigued me. So what the heck? Everybody knows the answer is very important. What good is it? You can ask any question you want. He felt that actually question is a lot more important than the answer. And I agree with him. Because what he said asking the right question is not easy. It takes a lot of imagination and work. Answer is guided by the right question. So if you're not asking the right question, then you cannot come up, you can come up with answers, but they're not, you're answering the right question. The reason Lloyd comes in, it has to do with this. I was doing my PhD thesis on the sperm of the sea cucumber, okay? Well, those of you who don't know about the sea cucumber, some of you may know. You do, not eating it. Okay. Sea cucumber, the sperm is very fascinating structure in that case, because when it wants to fertilize the egg, the tip of this sperm grows about 90 micron, okay, in very, very short time. We used to say that this is the biggest erection in the world. Because compared to the size of the species, it is about 20, 30 times the size of the whole cell. And my job was to find out how the actin molecules from the base of the cell travel to the tip of the growth and polymerize. You see that? It was a nice math problem, physics problem, and also it was a very interesting biological problem. Because if you know how that was happening, because actin molecules had to travel against the concentration of the actin to get to the tip. Now, what's that to do with anything? It has to do with the idea that the question was so pinpointed, so minute, so it was a good question in that sense. So the authors have divided the questions to microscopic question and macroscopic questions. I rather call them local questions and global questions. Global questions are important and of essence to most everything people do. Not that the small questions should not be asked. You have to ask small questions all the time. I shouldn't call it small, local questions. You have to ask questions after questions after question. And that's the job of the graduate students like Lloyd and I. We have to go and answer those questions. And that's the job of our advisors. They give us a question, we were answering it, and I don't know what happened to it. I don't know if anybody cared about that sea cucumber. But anyway, so that was the idea. What that led me to two people in science that I have both admired and tried to emulate, but not copy. I did. The two are, one of them everybody knows. I think both of them everybody knows. One is Einstein. The other one is Henri Poincaré, the well-known mathematician. Now, why is that crucial? You see, for most scientists, their science determines their philosophy. There are a few that philosophy determines the science. For Einstein and Poincaré, it was more two-way street. Their science affected their philosophy, and their philosophy affected the science. And what does that do? That takes imagination. And that takes psychology, and that takes the idea of asking the right question. And that is what Einstein and Poincaré did. They asked the correct question, big questions, but good questions. Einstein asked, suppose I was riding a beam of light, then how does time look on me on the street? That takes that kind of question. You're not just questioning the something little that you can answer in your dissertation, but penetrates the nature of life and everything else. And it takes a lot of imagination to ask that kind of question. Poincaré did exactly the same thing. He came up with the whole concept of topology, simply based, actually, it's, as he said, he felt his way through the psychology, through the topology. And of course, everybody knows he is probably the last universalist that we know. And incidentally, 3 days ago was the day that he passed away 100 years ago. 110 years ago. So, in a letter to Bertrand Russell, he wrote something very interesting. He said, Bertrand Russell talks about logic and epistemology. And he's correct. And Russell, in fact, he's one of the greatest logicians we know of all time. And emphasis was on that. And he said, it's not a question of psychology. And to which Poincaré said, actually, the whole epistemology and logic is based on psychology. So, how could you do logic without psychology? You can't. And that was the foundation of the work of Poincaré, and that was my starting point as well. So I got involved with the idea of how do we perceive things? How do we see things? What is going on? And this was about almost 17, 18 years ago. I started, after I had been involved with art. I've been doing art for about 20, 30 years and science all my life. So I decided, okay, how do we perceive things anyway? People keep saying that that painting is unified. The heck are they talking about? What does unification mean? Oh, that's a beautiful picture. What do you mean by that? Those are the questions that was going through my head. So I decided, okay, I need to write something about it, investigate it. And I came up to a question of, to me, that was a big question. How do we perceive? How do we manage in the reality of ours? So I wrote a book after I read what was the current of all other people who have written on this theory. I came up with my idea. I wrote a book, and the book is called Conjunctive Theory of Mental Imagery in Art and Sciences. And actually, the main gist of the book is about how you can unify different kinds of mental imagery. But I applied it to art and science because that's where my profession is. So what is that about? Now, that's where actually the lecture tonight starts. To begin with, we all know, well, I'll read it to you. Our universe is divided into two. We have an outer universe and inner universe. And that's not a new idea. In fact, Descartes' dualism was all about that. He called it a physical universe and a mental universe. And for Descartes, the important part of it is that those two don't mix. What happens in the physical universe is independent of what happens in your mental universe. However, that's where he and I depart. Conjunctive theory says that is not so. Okay? That cannot be so. So, maybe I can move this to somewhere else. Can I move that? Can you see it better? Yeah, okay. Now, conjunctive theory says that actually it is the physical universe doesn't determine your reality. Your mental universe doesn't determine your reality. Is the conjunction of the two and the interaction of the two that determines your reality. Now, the idea is not really new. And I come to it in a little bit. Well, how do they interact? There are many ways that they do interact. One of the important ways that they do interact is by mental imagery. Mental imagery is one of the ways that you build your mental universe out of your observations or interactions with your outside universe. That's how you make it. What do I mean by mental imagery? I'll come to it in a minute. However, that part, again, I want to go back to Poincaré, and that was one of the most important contributions of him. He said, science advances not by just sitting there and trying to inductively go from data to data and data. That's not the way science works. And I know a lot of scientists around here. My daughter is a chief scientist in a company and so on. I know a lot of scientists, and I've been doing science for a while myself, like about 50 years. But that's not the way you come up with the new ideas. You have to think in images, like Einstein was doing with sitting on a beam of light traveling. Okay? Or Schrödinger's thinking of a cat inside a box with trying to kill it. So thinking in images was important. And then you come up with the questions. And that was what Poincaré was suggesting. That's why I got fascinated by him. The idea goes back at least to what today is accepted now, the father of optics, Alhazen, or in English they call it Alhazen. That's okay, I can live with it. Okay. My daughter a lot of time tells me that anything good comes out, you say they were Persians, did it? And why not? It's the 4,000-year culture. But Alhazen, now it is recognized as the father of the modern optic. He's the one who actually went against everything that Aristotle and everybody else had said. And he had a very good idea. He says, psychology affects your perception. Your knowledge affects your perception. So that's what he said. He said, that's going to be. And he was able to explain something very cool. You see, every astronomer, and you don't even have to be an astronomer, everybody knows that when on the full moon, when the moon, you're looking at the horizon, it looks huge, right? And you go later on, 4 hours later, when it gets toward the top, you look at it, it looks small. That's called moon illusion. And people have been trying to explain that, how the heck that happens. Ptolemy had said that it happens because of refraction. Okay? He did. And that was accepted for about 10 centuries. He came out and he said, no, that's not the case. He said otherwise. But he said, so I want to show you what I mean. I asked my astronomy technician to take a picture when there was a full moon. We went on the observatory, which is not as nice as yours, but we were able to go. We have a nice rooftop. We can oversee the Foster City and everything else. So we take pictures. I asked him, do not change the setting on the camera so that the size of the pictures that we get come out the same. But because of the horizon and so on, the colors will change. We all know that. So we took some pictures. This is the moon right at the horizon. And it came out. We were looking at it. It was huge, really huge. And sometimes I take my wife there and show her and say, look, look, look. And she gets fascinated. And now she tells me to come and look. So we took a picture. We waited 2.5 hours. We took this picture. The plane is going in front of it. Was cool. That wasn't my idea. It was the dean's idea. Okay? He wanted to capture that. You measure it, you see the diameters are exactly the same. We were looking at it. It looks smaller than the other one, but it looks exactly the same on the picture. And we took it about 2.5 hours later, way up there. Still the same. All the same size. This is not completely above the horizon, way above the horizon. Okay? The same. Why? How does that do? How does it work? Alhazen explained it this way. I know some of you know, I'm sorry to repeat it in your ear, but that's what he said. He said, look, when you're looking at the horizon, what do you see? You see buildings, you see cities, you see everything else in between you and the moon. When you're looking up, you don't see anything, just the atmosphere, right? Well, guess what? From the childhood, we learned about distance and measure not by themselves, but by objects. As a baby, you learn how far the crib handle is by reaching for it and handling it. And as you move around for your bottle and everything else, you learn about distance by objects. If there were no objects in the universe, there won't be such a thing as distance at all. In fact, there was only one object in the universe that won't be anything as a distance. In fact, distance, as Leibniz defined it, is defined by the distance or separators of the objects. So on the horizon, there are a lot of objects in your way. So moon looks far away. And since it looks far away, you perceive it, it is bigger. Your knowledge says that is the same moon, so you see it bigger. When it goes on top, you don't have that luxury. So you see it smaller. You don't have a guess how far away it is. So he explained that psychology affects directly your perception, physical perception. So if the knowledge of distances affect your seeing moon smaller or bigger, doesn't that mean that your mental universe and physical universe are constantly in interaction with each other? That's how I built up the conjunctive theory. Now, what is it all about? To begin with, what is a mental imagery anyway? Mental imagery should not be confused with a mental image. That's not the same thing. And it shouldn't be even confused with a mental representation. That's not what mental imagery is. Mental imagery is a process by which you create mental images and mental representations. That's important to keep in mind, separating the outcome from the process that leads to that outcome. So, what does it do? Basically, physically, it manipulates the neurons in your brain, manipulates it in many ways, and rearranges it. The details of it are not that important, but of course you can read the book. Makes the mental representations of the objects that you see inside. But those objects need not be even real objects. You can make the mental images of anything you want. You can imagine your girlfriend has 3 heads, okay? You could do that. Don't do that though, okay? But it's up to you. Now, so the important part of it is that representation is in the absence or the presence of the real or non-real object. That's important. The type of imageries that are involved, the kind of pattern formations that are involved. I have broken it down into 3, and that's standard. That's not, I haven't done that myself. We break it down to auditory, sensual, and visual. Okay? Those are the 3 that you have. On the visual, for example, you try to mental presentation that are patterns of the light that you perceive. Einstein was very emphatic on mental imagery that involved visual mental imagery. Concept of space-time that he came up with was totally based on the idea of his mental image of the 4-dimensional space-time. On the other hand, Mozart was completely auditory. He could compose the whole piece in his head, visualize it before even brings it out. Poincaré was a very sensual one, as I told you earlier. So there are different modes of the mental picture. Now, how does that come to do with art and science? You see, we are born, actually, interestingly, where we have tendency to do with a sense of curiosity. We automatically want to explore. Why we have that, there are a lot of theories about it, one of which is that survival. You want to be able to explore your surrounding so that you avoid dangers. So we are naturally born to explore. And what do we want to explore? We want to explore the outside universe and inside universe. In doing so, as soon as you do that exploring, there are two things you want to do. You see something outside, immediately you want to know why it happens. You need to have an explanation, okay? You see rain, you want to know why it rains. You see hurricane, you see why the hurricane is there. Whatever happens, immediate thing, curiosity pulls you to try to explain the phenomenon. That is the birth of science. Science is the idea of trying to explain that you see around you. On the other hand, we also need to connect with our other people. That sense of trying to connect forces us to express ourselves. We need to express things. Okay, if I am mad, nobody sits down quietly mad. They scream, yell, they do something, they hit somebody, hit a wall, and so on. They express something. So basically, we have two functions that kind of express things and explain things. Now, let me give you a very quick definition of the explanation and expression so that we are not just vaguely speaking. When we talk about explaining, what we are being able to unravel a puzzle in front of us. That's what we are trying to do. Is we see something, we want to explain it, that means I want to know exactly what happened. It's as simple as that. On the other hand, expressing is the other way around. You feel something, you have some kind of emotion is happening, then you want to express it. Those are natural to everybody. Now, what has become a dichotomy and false one is that well, I'm going to skip this one. What has become common, people think that science does the explaining, art does the expressing, and the two don't mix. It couldn't be further from the truth. If you want to get a scientist mad, tell him his theory is false. Okay?
Sorry, his theory is what?
False. All you have to do is that, oh, no, your theory doesn't work without the experiments, okay? Somebody comes with a theory and you talk to him and try to criticize it. Even if your critic is kind of good, don't think that that person is sitting there taking it. Inside says, oh, you're absolutely wrong, okay? So scientists have a lot of emotions. They express it differently about their work. Artists, the other way around too. They have a lot of explaining to do, okay? Although, you go look at a painting and say, oh, what does that mean? Oh, you Philistine, don't you understand this? Of course you know what that means. But let me tell you what that means, okay? This painting I did way. I was a young kid when I did it. You notice the egg? You see the galaxy? And you see the hat? This is called the design of God, or the cosmic design, or something like that. I forget the name. I'm too old now. Now, you see that canvas is broken. You see the universe inside it, the space inside it. You know what that means? you notice that the egg has exactly the same pattern as the galaxy. And you see both of them are under the head. Doesn't that mean that actually those patterns are partly patterns that we are imposing on them? You see that? Now that makes sense. So the idea is that I believe that it is just the other way around. That dichotomy is absolutely false. And that is what attracted me to Einstein and Poincaré. They were both super duper artists and super duper scientists. And their art enriched their science, and their science enriched their art. Everybody knows Einstein talked about imagination quite a bit. But Poincaré was the one that actually wrote about epistemology based on the concept of art and defended that you cannot have a serious epistemology by ignoring mental images. He was saying and defending that you can only think with images if you're going to advance science. There are other things you can do. You could think in terms of words, but not in science, not in art. And those who do otherwise don't get anywhere. A good example of artists that does a lot of art was Heisenberg. Heisenberg, Schrodinger, Niels Bohr, all of those were really keen artists. They didn't label themselves artists. In fact, they didn't even label themselves scientists. In fact, they didn't label themselves anything. We labeled them. And what they did, they let their art influence their science, and their science their art. And both of them were interactive with their philosophy. That was important. So, what is conjunctive theory anyway? I'm going to draw a very skeleton of the idea. The preliminary edition of the book came out last year. The first edition came out this year. At the end of July, actually, it's going to come out. And the publisher has recommended it for the graduate school and the upper division. I wanted to recommend it for my school, but they didn't. All right, but that's the way it goes. What is it? First of all, I told you the idea is not new. What is new? How I have done it. First of all, I break the brain states in two completely different categories. There is a set of brain states that are stimulated by our senses and auxiliary related brain states. Okay, so for example, there are brain states that and our cortex, or visual cortex, that is directly stimulated by the signals hitting the retina of your eyes. Those kind of brain states are, I call them object-triggered brain states. Okay? And so I have broken it down into two, physical and psychological. Brain states that are physical are directly influenced by the signals. Then there is a set of brain states that I call them emergence brain, triggered brain. Those are more of the internal. They're programmed in your brain. Let me give you an example of it. The brain states involved with seeing the moon, as you look at the moon, that's object-triggered brain states. When you're looking at that, you're seeing the signals hitting your eyes, going right into your brain. But the size of the moon that you see is Not just that, another set of brain states, which is emergence triggered brain states, are triggered simultaneously, and the two together tells you the moon at the horizon is bigger and the moon on the top on the zenith is smaller. Does that make sense? So that means that every mental state that you have has two components. It has a psychological component. It has a physical component. The amount of it differs, but that's what it is about. Now, depending on the quality that you have a mental image of, the mental state that tells you that quality differs in the amount of the two kinds of brain states. And that determines what kind of quality you are perceiving. Now, here is the picture that I can tell you that would do what I am saying. ETBS and OTBS, these are the brain states that are emergence triggered brain states. These are object triggered brain states. The classical primary qualities, the qualities that Galileo and most of the science deals with, are the primary. There, what is low, ETBS is very low, OTBS is very high. In other words, it's dominated by the physical signals. And that's why science, Galileo in particular, they wanted to stay away from everything else because that made it easier to work with. In the mid-range here, they are about the same ratio. For example, perception of color, okay? What color you perceive is not just the idea of the wavelength. That's one part of it. The other part of it, your brain has to supply. That's why some people are colorblind, not simply because there's something wrong with their cones or rods. There is brain states that are a problem. Okay? And in fact, there were studies done with the people who were congenitally blind, and by the operation they were able to see. It took them a long while to come up with the idea of color because they have to train their brain to see it again. So those mid-range are the secondary qualities. And the last one, and this is the two where the classical philosophy stopped. This was mainly a lot of Galileo, John Locke, and everybody else was around here, and that's where they stopped. Tertiary colors are where the ETBS is very high. The programming of the brain is very high. If you want to think about a computer program, these are software that can run things. These are the signals that come in. Okay? Here, signal manipulation is highly dependent on the programs. What are the examples of that? A good concept of it, concept of beauty. The way we perceive beauty. Grace of something. Deliciousness. You think of something as delicious or not delicious. Those are all qualities that are programmed. That's why people differ a lot more in what they consider something tastes good as something what shape it is. Everybody looks at a triangle, says triangle, no matter who it is. But I can, in fact, my wife and I are a good example of it. Almost anything she likes, I hate. Okay? So it's a matter of taste. Some people love hot food. I hate hot food. So the point I'm trying to make, why? Because ETBS is very high. And ETBS is super, super culture dependent. And that is actually the topic of my second semester course, how the cultures can determine these things. And in fact, on the side note, I'm having a seminar coming up on August 5th, 6th, and 7th. One of the things I'm going to be talking about would be the body image. People's image of their own body. And what can they consider good body, bad body, and so on and so forth. Why am I doing that? Because right now it's reaching an epidemic among the young people. And I'm going to give you the seminar mainly talking about it, how that is culture dependent, how the television, media, and so on determine so many ETBs goes into your head that what constitutes a good body, what constitutes a bad body. So all of this falls into this tertiary category. Now, this is a page from my book I took here. This is your outer universe, what goes on inside to what you perceive. And then on the side, you can see the level of the ETBS determine whether it's the primary, secondary, or tertiary. All right? Okay. Now we're going to get that's enough of the conjunctive theory. We're going to get into it as it applies to our talk tonight, which is the art and science. Okay? And one of the implication conjunctive theory is that you cannot do science, you cannot do art without both inner and outer universe being involved. It just can't be done. You could do it as a technician. Technician can get something and do the centrifuge and come up with a piece of data. But you cannot do science that way. The same is true with the art. You could do a lot of craft that way, but you cannot do art that way. I love that statement. That's what I really think is the crux of the whole thing, and is due to my favorite philosopher, Henry Poincaré. You cannot do. Your reality is really determined by what comes to you, you perceive. And that is all you can do. You cannot have, if there was a reality that you have no access to it, it may as well not exist. You can think about it, you can have it there, but it's not going to be there. But if there is a reality that you're going to tell me that exists, independent of my perceptions and my mental imagery, show me how. Carl Sagan used to say, I accept your statement that there is a dragon in your garage, but show it to me.
Expression of relativity.
That goes with that too. Relativity tells you a little bit more than that. Relativity says that even the physical observation, okay, the status of the observer determines what they observe. Quantum mechanics goes even one step further. It says there is no such a thing as reality over there. What as reality becomes reality only when you observe it. In other words, they call it this idea of superposition. Everything is, that's the Schrodinger cat story. Everything is there. The only time becomes reality if there is an observer. If you don't observe it, it doesn't exist. Okay? Now, it is very important to think about it, that you don't get up and walk around and say, oh, I am having artistic experience. I am a scientific experience. You don't. You just have experience. You label it, whether it is artistic or it is not. So the dichotomy, the division is totally artificial. And science and art progress, if that fact is recognized and built upon. And that's exactly what Henry Poincaré was doing. And that is how he came up with his topology, and that's how he came up with his mathematics that even today we are using in nuclear physics. Poincaré had a conjecture, I don't know how many of you know, but I say it anyway. He had that if you have any simply closed manifold, it is always equivalent to a, no matter what dimension, let's say n dimensions, it is always can be transferred into a sphere of the same number of dimensions. That's what's called Poincaré conjecture. He didn't prove it. He left it. It took 100 years or so. It was recently proved by a Russian mathematician. But he visualized it. He saw it in his head. In fact, he was saying at one point that he could see the solution, but he cannot put his hand on it, on the proof, I'm sorry. So, my point is that every work of art explains something and expresses something. Okay, let me tell you about this. In this painting, I have my wife sitting here by the water and so on. She always hates me to ask her to pose for me, but I don't care. I do it anyway. So, but this is called transition. What does that mean? You notice that there is a universe out there that's very geometric, and universe here very geometric. That one made mostly of this, the biggest part is a circle, which is in traditional Western tradition is considered a perfect shape. This part is mainly squares. You notice that we have only a small part of the universe available to us. Most of it is not available to us. And Richard and I were talking about a group that he heard I talk about in one of the talks years ago, a group called Dark Energy. Dark energy forms about, let's say approximately 75 to 80% of our universe. Dark matter makes us about 19, 20% of it. About 1 or 2% of it is visible to us. That we know experimentally. That painting expresses that idea. That's why it's called transition. So, what am I trying to say? Is that your reality is a lot more enriched if you looked at it with both scientific eyes and artistic eyes. Not instead, and that and is emphasized. Only through science and art that civilization is of value. That is the important. That was the message of Poincaré to me about 46 years ago. But I did not understand it quite well. I read it, but didn't understand it until I met my wife, who is an artist. and I became an artist, then this statement says to me. And that was about 30 some years ago. Now, conjunctive theory takes the idea that one of the people who talked about it before was Immanuel Kant. It's taken it to a little bit different direction. We talk about two kinds of beauty, ontic beauty and modal beauty. Ontic beauty is a beauty of things, like when you look at the rose or something like that. Modal beauty is the beauty of doing it. So that's why you can look at a gruesome picture painting, which has zero ontic beauty, but it has a great modal beauty. If those of you have seen Goya's Colossal, where Saturn is eating his own baby, it's a very gruesome picture, but it has amazing modal beauty. So, the essence of art, according to my theory, is the creation of the modal beauty. And in fact, anytime, okay? Anytime you intend to include beauty in your artwork, no matter what you're doing, you're acting as an artist. And in fact, that's exactly what I tried to do to this PowerPoint. I tried to make it as beautiful as I could. It may not be up to your taste, but I like it. Okay? And this painting here is called The Music of Spheres. It comes from the poem by Chaucer, who said, donkeys are deaf to the music of harp. And the painting refers to the time that we stop listening to the music of spheres. We lost it. Now, how about science? Anytime you want to look at anything, let's say you're choosing a carpet, if you apply scientific method, you're a scientist. You're cooking something on the pot, on the stove. If you apply scientific method, which is what? Observe, make a hypothesis, test your hypothesis by predicting what the heck is going on. Okay? For example, I'm put the water on the stove. I observe that water is not getting hot. Hypothesis, I forgot to turn on the oven. Okay? So that's a scientific method. You don't have to be very fancy. You don't have to be a, what was a great experimentalist? I think one of the great experimentalists was Faraday. You don't have to be a Faraday to do that. In fact, Einstein was the opposite. They never let him go to the laboratory because he messed things up. So, read that statement. I stay quiet for a second for you, okay? Because it's a very, very profound statement. Richard, could you read that too? Read it loud for everybody. Go for it.
All right. Arts and sciences are branches of the same tree, and we do art when we communicate through forms whose connections are not accessible to the conscious mind, yet we intuitively recognize them as something meaningful.
Guess who said that? Albert Einstein. That's what I mean by that. Now let me go. Looking at science artistically. Now, Richard, could you read that one too?
All right. It is more important to have beauty in one's equations than to have them fit experiment. It seems that if one is working from the point of view of getting beauty in one's equations, and if one has really a sound insight, one is on a sure line of progress.
And this is another one of my favorite guys. In fact, I had breakfast with this guy when I was a young kid. Yeah. There is no more eminent scientist than Dirac. He's one of the fathers, in fact, grandfathers of the quantum mechanics. That's what he said. So you see another example of this kind of work. De Broglie was looking at the photon. He noticed that photon phenomenon, Einstein had already explained it, that photon behave both like a wave and like a particle. And he depended on the beauty. And here's what he argued. Nature is beautiful. If the nature is beautiful, it cannot create non-symmetric universe. So if the photon is a wave that has a particle character, then electron is a particle that must have the wave character. Wave mechanics. Again, you don't come up with that by looking at data. Mental imagery. Mental imagery does that. And this one is a cool one too. Painting is a science and should be pursued as inquiry into the laws of nature. You know who wrote that? Not Jack, but close. John Constable. He wrote that. And in fact, the painting is mine, but that's my experiment with nature. It is a part of a Simvisio. All right. Now, this is the painting of mine that I did. Most of the paintings that you saw, I put some frame around it using the computer. This painting has no frame. In fact, in real life, it's a relatively much bigger than this, but everything is painted. There is no, all of it is painting. Now, if you look at that, artistically, it's good because the colors are nice. I have used the Persian color theme, put it in there, and it looks pretty good. Then down here, there is a little thing that I have. It says title, and there is something in there. The slide cannot do justice to it, but you have to see it. And then I want to look at this scientifically. René Magritte had said something very cool. He said that art evokes the mystery without the world would not exist. And to me, the key to looking at art scientifically is to look for those mysteries. Look for those mysteries. And I want to look on this one a little bit closer. I'm going to get that same painting and turn it around like this. 90 degrees. Okay, you suddenly see that, wait a minute, that's a room, isn't it? And in fact, let me take this here and enlarge it on the side. You see that the title is the dining room. It's turned around. Now, if you look carefully, you see carpet, carpet. 6 chairs in different languages. Buffet in the back, buffet in the back. Fireplace, fireplace. Mirror, mirror, and so on. So it is duplicated in abstract, telling you that words and pictures can exchange themselves in your mind. That's the mystery of this painting. What the heck? I don't want that. Now the question is, how do we develop that ability? How do you, and I have been trying for the last 20, 30 years, try to develop both of those abilities in my students. Most of the students I get are students of science and mathematics, but I push them quite a bit. When I'm teaching math, for example, when I'm teaching differential equation, I teach my students try to visualize the solution to the differential equation from the relationship before you try to put the procedure into place and solve it. And in fact, I very emphatically that if you cannot visualize your differential equation, then you really don't understand it, even if you come up with a solution, if you can solve it. So this is my advice. Approach it. If you want to do that, you have to very easy. Have an aesthetic attitude toward looking at science and have scientific attitude toward art. Simple. Simply said, it takes a lot to practice because we try to forget. So what do? When you look at something, ask yourself, what the heck is it saying? What is it expressing? This painting is called Many Layers of Understanding. No. You see, this is a painting by Mondrian. Mondrian believed strongly that the only paintings should be square lines or 90 degrees. I purposely turned it on telling him, listen, you can never perceive anything exactly at 90 degrees unless you're head on, because that's one. And I took his colors, put it in the background, and here I put down two leaves. One of the leaves is real leaf from a tree, and the other one I painted. And with time, one of them is going to get darker. So the darkness of the leaf is going to age the painting, what year it was made. And then you will see that I have 6 persimmons that are big, pronounced. That reference to the 5 persimmon that is the part of the Chinese philosophy. So, and if you look very carefully, there is a tag in there. In Burmese, it is written on it, leaf. And then you see a lot of dead leaves. No. How do you look at this painting? Aesthetically, you can look at it, like it or not like it. But how do you look at it scientifically? Like anything else, you make a hypothesis and you test your own hypothesis, see if it holds or doesn't. If it doesn't, you change it. Now, this is a painting done by Picasso. And the reason I put it there, Picasso and Einstein lived about the same time that Poincaré. And Picasso actually and Einstein, both of them, a lot of their work was based on the work of Poincaré. Poincaré, in one of his writings, had written about the idea of how about looking at many perspectives. Human mind cannot see one perspective. It cannot see more than one perspective at a time. Picasso decided, okay, I'm going to do a painting. So decided to do one of his figures from 2 perspectives, and birth of the Cubism. Again, philosophy influencing science, science influencing philosophy, and both of them influencing art, and art influencing them. This is what Einstein visualized about the space-time. I want to look at this and see how it can, look how beautiful it is. He said, and for the longest time, people were asking that question. We knew, I think Newton said, well, look, the moon is out there and Earth pulls on it. Before that, actually, they believed that angels are doing their job. Yeah, but that's a little bit too far back. But always the question was, how the heck does it do that? How does Earth pull on the moon? Because anytime we pull something, we have a rope or something. How does it do that? In science, we say we have to act on it. Pull it with a rope, push it with a shovel or something like that. So, and scientists have a tendency that if they don't know anything, they name it. Okay, so how does the Earth pulls on the moon? We call it action at a distance. What the heck? It doesn't say anything. It took the imagination of Einstein, saying that all objects in the universe are surrounded by space-time, and their masses distorts the space-time, like in here. And objects move according to law of inertia on the shortest or the least energy path. Geodesics, or the shortest path or the least energy path, gets distorted to this shape. So the objects do a different motion. I try to show that a little bit better. I don't know how successful I am. I'm going to try it. Here is Jupiter, exaggerated. Suppose it's moving in that direction, then goes here, boom. See, if it starts in that direction, it goes that way. If do I have any more? It starts there. Now, if it is going that way, okay, that was it. It goes that way. With that said, thank you. All right. All right. Any question?
Questions? Questions? No questions.
I'm sorry, my head hurts. I've had a lot to think about here. It appears to me that I'd like you to comment on Poincaré's impact upon Einstein in terms of generating general relativity. Was Einstein aware of? He must have been of Poincaré's work.
Oh God, they work together.
Yeah.
Even though they're French and German, they did. Einstein.
Did Einstein? Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Poincaré develops his theory quite a bit in terms of motions of the objects and so on. But he, at the end, I think in 2002, he wrote that at this point.
You mean 1902?
1902, I'm sorry. In 1902, he wrote that at this point, I am moving in mathematics and I'm entering the field of science. And I don't feel like comfortable to do that. Einstein built that in 1905, wrote the special relativity. And Einstein, with the help of a mathematician named Grossman, worked on the manifold structures that Poincaré had put together to develop his the so-called Ricci tensor, which is caused the general relativity. Poincaré was not aware of the general relativity because Poincaré died in 1912, and relativity did not come up. General relativity did not come up till 1915, and so in that period, they needed to develop the mathematics, and a lot of mathematics that they used was developed by Poincaré, in particular some of the group theories. Okay,
Thank you for clarifying that.
my pleasure.
Oh, and the Grossman was, that was the fellow who was one of Einstein's close friends, wasn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, of course. Yes.
Well, I asked this question before, but when you don't have the science knowledge and you're looking at a painting, the Mondrian, say, painting, that has a lot of information that goes into the creation of that painting. Where does that fall in the eyes of the artist who did the painting, that I don't have that knowledge, or what, how does it affect the overall appreciation of something when we just don't have that knowledge?
Oh, you don't need that knowledge. What you appreciate is based what you want to get out of it. But now, like I said, you're doing science when you're cooking. Okay? What do you do when you cook? You say, if I'm gonna put this with that, you make some kind of hypothesis and you test that to see what works. With this painting, the same thing. You look at something, you don't know what it is, you make an assumption and test to your assumption works.
We have a recipe when we're cooking and we're maybe manipulating or following it. I don't have a recipe that goes with an artwork that is on a wall that has multi messages and science and religion and background in it. How does,
I know what you're saying, but you don't need recipe. In fact, let me tell you what you do, I know for fact. Well, maybe I shouldn't say. Let me get a more general term. In everything that you do, for example, you want to cut a plant short. Okay? The first thing you do was that. If I want to cut that plant short, is it going to kill it? Is it not going to kill it? Then what do? You make a hypothesis. You either make it yourself or you go to your nursery and ask them, hey, what happens if I cut this plant? And they give you the idea. Then you come and you form that hypothesis and then you test it. Okay? That's all the science is about. Make assumption and test your assumption. And if it is not right, change it. You don't need to. I think it was Coleridge who said that when I read a poem, I think a poet wrote it because he makes me feel like a poet. And when you watch a movie, you don't know what the director had in mind. You don't know. Somebody else writes about it. You make your own what you see. And you make your own judgment. All I am saying, do that scientifically. Let me say something else in that regard. When you're watching TV, old TVs send you about somewhere around 3 million bit of information every second. New TVs with the HD, they have changed that to about 30 million per second. At every second, your mind only picks up about 60 or 70 pixels of it. The rest of it, you're making it up. You don't see it. You think you're seeing it. Okay? You are making it up. When you're looking at it, you are the artist who makes it. So when you're looking at a painting, what the artist does doesn't matter. When you look at the art from a different country, look at Egypt or art on the walls about 30,000 years ago, it doesn't matter what the artist had in mind. As long as you can get what out of it you want. All I'm saying, you enrich your artistic appreciation by applying the scientific method to it as well. Yes.
I don't even know if I can articulate this question. So the first thing that I was thinking of when you started your talk tonight was the old saying about if a tree falls in a forest, does it
Right.
make a sound?
Uh-huh.
That's all I could think about for the first 20 minutes of your talk. And that got me thinking, based on your hypothesis or your theory here, that we are somehow engaged in this grand experiment of determining truth.
You're
And
not.
truth is some sort of statistical average.
That's a very good way of putting it. But what I actually, to answer your question, if the question comes is that if the tree falls, what does it make a sound? The correct answer is that was there a tree? Okay,
Yeah, that's good. That's a good answer. Yeah.
so because if there's no one to observe it, you wouldn't know. That's number one. Number two, you're right. We are not. I'm not trying to tell you what the reality is, but I am trying to tell you exactly what you said it better than I did. We all can have only a statistical understanding of what the reality is, not any absolute reality. And it changes. The reality for the people on 21st century is entirely different for the people from the 13th century. If you take a TikTok to 13th century, what do you think they do? Think about it. It
He's
doesn't
a
work.
witch.
Yeah. All right. Anything else? Well, thank you.
Let me double check the TikTok here to see whether it's nope.
Thank you for mentioning Magritte.
Yes.
I said, thank you for mentioning
My pleasure.
Magritte.
Anyone else?
Yes.
The card.
That card is from you.
Yes.
Thank you. Uh-huh.
It's a woman sitting on the moon, pulling out of her body a planet.
Uh-huh. I have a painting actually that way. I did it about maybe, mine was about 30 years ago. And it's called G. If you go on my website, you will see it. It's called G. But that's fine. And it is on my website. My website, you can go to it and see it. But the interesting thing that you mentioned, I think what we need to celebrate is this. For the first time, you're sending a woman to the moon. Okay? That to me is a woman and person of color going to the moon. I think that's a big celebration for the whole humanity. But that you can do. By the way, these paintings that you see, they're called Simvicios. And I told you I'm going to ask you at the very beginning. I did the first one. If you see it again, go to my website, see it, and ask yourself scientifically, what does it mean? This one is a garden of a friend of mine that I did. But they're big. They're about, what is it, 340 inches. So they tell you a story. So that's all I can tell you. How many feet? Yeah, that's big. Yeah, it's good. Is that what I see there? It's awesome. Thank you. I heard question? Yes. Sure. Actually, my web, you can, if you go to my website, you can email me. Also, Richard has all the information that you need. Certainly, of course. Other question there? Okay.
Anyone
All
else?
right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You had a question.
Work. So thank you so much for this. So what you've said